Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping into the shadows to explore something that is truly profound and honestly a little terrifying. We're unpacking a grim, dark fable that's deeply rooted in Nietzschean philosophy and the ancient art of psychological alchemy. Now, this isn't your standard self-help narrative. Instead, it's a visceral, unflinching look at exactly how we transmute our darkest internal shadows, our vices, our guilt, our malice, into the ultimate fuel for personal growth. So brace yourselves, because we are absolutely about to pull back the curtain on the human ego.
Our journey kicks off with a brutal, brooding assessment from a figure known as the Pale Inquisitor. Just imagine this intense voice echoing in the dark. I seek to incinerate the heresy of your unexamined thought. The Inquisitor doesn't care about our polite little excuses. He sees right through the modern language we use to mask our lies. He challenges the very foundation of our unexamined human ego, perceiving that raw, naked impulse long before we even try to hide it.
And this leads us to a pretty direct challenge for you. What happens if you refuse this internal sacrifice? What happens if we cling to what the Inquisitor calls our decorative shrouds of performative grief? Do you actually think those shrouds protect you? The text poses this chilling question. Will your character crack under the structural weight of secret guilt? Because, spoiler alert, when the atavistic fires come, those decorative masks are going to burn right away.
Chapter 1. The Threat of the Unexamined Mind. Okay, let's dive into this. To set the opening stakes of this mythic hero's journey, we first have to deeply understand the existential threat of leaving our own minds unexamined. To really ground this metaphor for us, look at how the text defines the human mind. The Inquisitor actually calls your skull an alchemical laboratory of deceit. It's this place where sins are brewed in the dark and justifications are distilled out of pure malice. We are literally masters of mislabeling our own internal rot. Think about it. We take our unexpressed envy, dress it up, and call it wisdom. We take our cowardice and we rebrand it as survival. We lie to ourselves first and foremost.
But if you refuse to face these shadow trials, the consequences outlined in the source material are absolute. Without this brutal alchemical trial, your so-called logic is exposed as nothing more than a glass fortress that just melts under the Inquisitor's gaze. It exposes that our civilization is really just a thin coat of paint over a deep well of primordial brutality. Ultimately, if you refuse the trial, you become a monument to psychological death, totally unable to evolve or ever stand as the sole ruler of your own existence.
Chapter 2. The Alchemical Trials.
We're transitioning now from the threat of the unexamined mind to the actual trials required to face the raw, naked impulse of our malice and transform it. Here we have the 5 parables of the Twilight Redemption. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the paradigm shift it introduces. These steps are not about destroying your devils. They are entirely about transmuting them. The alchemical process requires that you don't banish your darkness, but rather you integrate it. Let's look at exactly how this is done through these archetypal parables.
First up is the parable of the desert anchorite, who sought to escape the devil of social conformity. Now, the initial human instinct here is to just silence the whisper of the crowd and run away, right? But true alchemy happens differently. The anchorite actually listened to that lonely, deep craving for belonging and integrated it into a fiercer, self-chosen resolve. By facing the loneliness head-on, he turned that desperate need for others into the vast, unshakable strength of an independent self, as vast as the desert itself.
Next, we have the parable of the mountain's embrace. Here, a traveler meets the devil of self-pity, depicted as this weeping shadow blaming the entire world for its pain. But instead of banishing this pathetic ghost, the traveler literally wrapped his arms around the weeping shadow. He took that raw butterness and transformed it into the fuel for intense artistic creation. The weeping became a song, forging that weakness directly into incredible inner strength.
In the third trial, the parable of the glacial forge, we come face to face with the devil of nostalgia. High up on a frozen peak, this devil offers these warm, paralyzing visions of lost loves. The traveler felt the bitter sting of abandonment, sure, but he didn't retreat into those warm memories. Instead, he accepted the freezing cold as a necessary forge to harden his heart. By integrating the pain of loss, he transformed his loneliness into a protective armor of absolute self-reliance.
Then, confronted by the devil of meaninglessness at the highest precipice in the fourth trial, the parable of the laughter in the void, the creator is told that all effort is utterly pointless. But he didn't look for a god or some system to rescue him. He stared directly into the terrifying abyss, laughed right back at it, and decided to invent his own sacred values. And this brilliantly illustrates how, by absorbing the terrifying void, the creator actually becomes the sole light of their own existence.
Chapter 3. The Transmutation.
This profound realization from the previous parables leads us directly into the fifth and final parable, which entirely shifts the energy from dark, heavy bitterness into an incredibly empowering realization of self-mastery. The parable of the transformed companions details a climber finally reaching the ultimate summit, but his realization isn't one of conquest over dead enemies. No, it's the profound truth that his journey was never about killing his devils, but carrying them as transformed companions. He recognizes that his internal struggles provided the exact raw material he needed for his own self-renewal.
The crucial takeaway from this transmutation is that the raw bitterness of the shadow is no longer a poison that kills you. It becomes the very fuel for your creative power. The text explicitly states that these 7 devils are not your executioners. Rather, they're the necessary friction required to ignite what Nietzschean philosophy calls the fire of the overman, a state of completely transcending your former self.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Chapter 4, Forging Self-Sovereign Values.
Now that we understand the alchemy of turning shadow into fuel, we need to map out the actual architecture of the personal values created by this intense internal friction. As you can see, every psychological obstacle directly forges our self-sovereign values. The anchorite faces conformity to forge fiercer resolve. The mountain faces self-pity to forge artistic creation. The forge faces nostalgia to build absolute self-reliance. And the void faces meaninglessness to birth sacred personal values. Every single devil is just raw material waiting to be synthesized into the architecture of your highest self.
And finally, Chapter 5, The Star of High Time.
We finally reached the climax of our fable, the absolute peak of psychological evolution in this philosophical framework. At this peak, the existential void is no longer a looming threat that paralyzes you, it becomes a blank canvas for your invented values. It's vital to clarify that this state isn't about submitting to external dogmas or waiting around for permission. It's about achieving the high time of self-overcoming, where you are generating your own light entirely from within.
But listen, the Star of High Time doesn't just appear to anyone. There are strict prerequisites. You have to face the starry abyss without blinking. You must vehemently refuse the wine of total despair offered by the soothsayer. And crucially, you have to stop seeking what the text calls celebrated victimhood. You simply must accept the internal sacrifice of your unvarnished malice if you ever want to see this light.
So, the crucial point is captured perfectly in this final quote from the Star of High Time itself. I am the light that shines when the traveler finally stands as the sole ruler of his existence. This light isn't something descending from the sky to magically save you. It represents the ultimate strength of your own heart, beating with a purpose as unshakable as the desert sands you had to cross to get here. And that leaves us with one final provocative question for you to ponder. Will you look through the mirror of your shadows to ignite the fire of the overman? Will you stop running from the demons in your alchemical laboratory and instead use their necessary friction as your absolute greatest creative fuel? The abyss is waiting out there, not to destroy you, but to serve as the canvas for the values you choose to invent. Thank you so much for joining me in the shadows for this explainer.